Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. Where to start with this one?
The Last Night debuted in time for the Transformers film series' 10th anniversary. Any series would consider that a milestone, regardless of how well it was received by critics and audiences. A lot of time has passed, giving the franchise a chance to evolve. At least that's the ideal circumstance. So far, the quality of these movies have ranged from average to eye-roll inducing. They have some interesting ideas which are occasionally adapted from some other Transformers shows or comic that came before. They also have some annoying characters and bad jokes that grind the film to a halt. And despite how much product placement makes its way into these movies, for both vehicles that the characters transform into as well as random products in general, you know what they're really bad at advertising? The Transformers toys. You'd think Hasbro would object to the creative decisions Michael Bay was making that got in the way of showing off the main product of the movie.
Normally, I'm all for directors having creative freedom without having to worry about executives breathing down their neck. But when your director decides to give the military more screen time than the title characters, includes a pair of racial stereotypes, and decides the action should be too close to the characters to tell what's going on, perhaps it's time you tap on the director's shoulder and say, it's time to make some changes.
I brought up in the Age of Extinction review, these movies make a metric crapload of money. They get all sorts of criticisms from both professional critics and Transformers fans, get nominated for plenty of Razzies, winning their fair share of them too. These movies really bring out the worst in the G1ers, seeing as they became very vocal starting with the first film. They are the reason the flames on Optimus Prime's vehicle mode is such a contentious topic. However, audiences come to see these movies and are one of the most mainstream representations of Transformers to date. So whether it's a good idea or not, they would continue to be made.
Meaning we're 5 movies in and we're still getting the full Bayformers experience. For the 5th time. Let us begin.
Part 5. Bayformers, a Decepticon in King Arthur's court.
Magic does exist. It was found long ago inside a crashed alien ship.
Yeah, that's a sentence that exists. And this sure is an opening, where we see King Arthur fighting a losing battle. I have no idea how explosions are happening in a battle where neither side has gunpowder. Arthur and his knights are hoping for reinforcements from the wizard Merlin, and I promise this has something to do with Transformers. I'm getting to that. For in this movie, Merlin has no magic powers, as he's simply a drunk Stanley Tucci. Yeah, Joshua Joyce's actor from the last movie. It's tempting to say he's fallen from grace, but his small role is perhaps one of the more entertaining parts of this movie. What Merlin lacks in real magic, he makes up for in being friends with giant alien robots who turn the tide of battle. We cut to the present day, and despite the Autobots having saved Hong Kong from the rampaging KSI drones in the last movie, the relations between humanity and the Cybertronians is still hostile. Except in Cuba, where the Autobots are allowed to roam freely, along with Agent Simmons. Glad to see him, though it's a shame his part is a glorified cameo as he pesters Anthony Hopkins over the phone into joining his exclusive club. More on that later. He's not the only familiar face. Major Lennox, one of the recurring soldier characters from the first 3 movies, has taken charge of the Transformers Reaction Force, which appears to be more humane than Cemetery Wind. Look, they even take prisoners, something they didn't even do when they were working with the Autobots. They are still hunting them, though, which is where the last film's protagonist, Cade Yeager, comes in. He's providing refuge for the Autobots, including the Dinobots, who have given birth to baby Dinobots? I have so many questions that I know have no answers. Where do Transformers come from in the movie universe? A surprisingly convoluted and contradictory topic. In the first film, it was the Allspark. Age of Extinction introduced an alien species called the Creators. All we saw of them was an arm, not a tentacle, so they're not the Quintessons then.
Or are they, because this movie offers yet another explanation, as Optimus Prime encounters a cybernetic? Fully robotic? Well, whatever she is, she calls herself Quintessa, which was the name of the Quintessons' home planet. And her design kind of reminds me of Botanica from Beast Machines. She claims to be the Cybertronians' creator with, you guessed it, no attempts to reconcile her with the Creators or the Allspark.
There are small things I could nitpick, like Lennox recognizing Megatron's voice despite how, when Lennox last saw him, he was played by Hugo Weaving and now he's played by Frank Welker. But that doesn't really break the internal logic of the movie itself. Maybe that's the film being meta in the sense they quote-unquote recognize Megatron's voice. And yes, I said Megatron, not Galvatron. Just like in the Unicron trilogy days, the character has now gone back and forth between the two names because Megatron's name has more brand recognition. You could argue in the film universe, Galvatron was simply the name of the drone Megatron possessed in Age of Extinction, and not a name he personally identified with. Okay, fine, but he doesn't appear to be in that drone body. Besides being redesigned, he transforms normally instead of a burst of nanomachines. No explanation is ever offered. All I'm left to infer is that Quintessa did it, seeing as they're working together to bring the broken remains of Cybertron back to Earth, which looks a lot smaller than it did in Dark of the Moon, but it's also a lot less intact. The Autobots are attacked by the Decepticons and the TFR, leading to Cade being introduced to Anthony Hopkins' character Sir Burton, last member of the Order of the Witwickens,
a secret society that kept the knowledge of Transformers hidden on Earth a secret for the past 16 centuries, with hilariously bad pictures of familiar characters shown in old images, especially when they clearly have modern alternate modes.
That reminds me, Burton's line about being the last of the Witwickens has led some to believe that means Sam Witwicky is dead. Honestly, I think that's just wishful thinking on the part of people who dislike the character. But that does bring to mind something that happened in Age of Extinction. In that film, it was established that Optimus was attacked by Lockdown prior to the film's events. That's the reason why he's damaged when Cade finds him. And when he's repaired, Optimus can be heard saying this. I don't know if you could make it out, but it sounded like he said, "Run." Guess that means if Sam is dead, then Lockdown is responsible. Speaking of Optimus Prime, he has maybe 15 minutes of screen time, being brainwashed by Quintessa early in the film, and is then largely absent until the climax, where he's confronted by Bumblebee, who tries to free him from the brainwashing. Yes, it is similar to the original series episode Attack of the Autobots. Hilariously, this film shares both the Optimus-Bumblebee fight from that episode and the much less engaging battle with the villains that followed. And after multiple movies of Bumblebee not being able to speak, it finally pays off when he breaks through to Prime by talking. Too bad the excessive lens flares and shaky cam in this scene hurt the dramatic impact, as does yet another continuity snarl.
Your voice. I have not heard it since Cybertron fell.
Permission to speak, sir.
Permission granted, old friend.
You speak now? You speak now? You speak now? You speak now?
Wow, that Unicron singularity, the in-universe explanation for why plot holes exist in Transformers. It's working overtime to create them here. And yet that's not even the strangest thing that happens to Bumblebee in this movie. In his first scene, he gets blasted to pieces by the TRF, and he can somehow pull himself back together no worse for wear. I think the movie is now bragging about how strong his plot armor is, because we've seen a lot of characters get blown to bits and torn apart in ways that definitely killed them. Like Starscream, who had his head blown off in Dark of the Moon. No, I don't know how his severed head can appear intact in this film. It just does because fuck it. Now, I just went through a lot of small continuity details, some of which might not sound like a big deal. The pictures in particular can come across as nitpicky, seeing as they are props only seen on screen for a few seconds. I don't blame you for thinking this. And that's fine, because that's hardly the biggest problem with The Last Night. You want to know something that makes it hard to watch? A genuine flaw that brings the movie down? It's without question the editing. Holy shit, this is some of the worst editing I've seen in a mainstream Hollywood film. Very few shots last longer than 8 seconds, with characters' lines often cut into a different shot before they can finish speaking a full sentence. It's often hard to tell where the characters are supposed to be in scenes because their positions often change between cuts. And as for the action scenes, forget about it. They are more disorienting than ever. There are multiple car chases in this movie, but hardly any of the carnage stays on screen for long enough to appreciate it. Explosions and overly bright lights obscure a lot of fight scenes. Battles aren't well put together. I mean, look at this edit. What the hell is that? Speaking of fight scenes, boy does this movie like to indulge in slow motion. One of the characters is even given a slow-motion gun to give us even more reasons to drag this out while simultaneously cutting to the next shot way too quickly. What's made even worse is that this movie has a very bare-bones story, so it's filled out with a lot of action scenes, half of which feel like filler more than anything else, and the frenetic editing means we can't even enjoy it for the sake of having a cool action scene. And then there's another transforming elephant in the room again. The aspect ratio. One that is constantly changing throughout the movie, seemingly at random. This was a problem in the last movie, but I somehow didn't notice until I was editing my review. I confess that I needed to use footage from different sources, making me assume that was the reason. But it turns out Age of Extinction was seriously filmed this way, and it's even more noticeable in The Last Night. You, my dearest viewers, have already commented on this, so I might not need to go into further detail because you already know what I'm talking about. It's as disorienting as the blocking and fight choreography.
Like I said before, I saw the first 2 movies in theaters, but not films 3, 4, and 5. Good, because I can only imagine how terrible this must have looked on the big screen. My dearest viewers who did see it in theaters, by all means, share your experience.
Naturally, the editing affects the plot of this movie. Am I really only now narrowing down on the plot? Why did it take this long? Probably because the movie has a lot of half-baked ideas that they don't explore at all because they have to rush through everything. Cuba has become a refuge for Transformers and we get like 2 scenes of that. Lennox is back and there's tension between him and Cade over how he effectively turned on the Autobots, but their reconciliation towards the end is rushed. The Order of the Witwickens raises a bunch of questions, while also showing us Bumblebee fought in World War II. That at least gets a brief flashback. But there's also a lot of untapped potential in this story, like the part where our heroes commandeer a real submarine, the HMS Alliance, which is apparently one of many Cybertronians hiding out on Earth but never transforms or show any signs of being sentient. Now that is a waste. There's the butler robot Cogman, who is called a headmaster, but has 0 headmaster-related abilities. His toy can switch places with one of the Decepticons' heads, but they left that part out of the movie. Optimus is brainwashed by Quintessa, but he's largely absent for the majority of the movie, giving us very little time to explore the concept of an evil Optimus Prime. He fights Bumblebee, and then he's free. And finally, there's the MacGuffins that push the movie forward. First, Cade gets his hands on a Cybertronian talisman, while Burton points him in the direction of Merlin's staff, which is needed by Quintessa to complete her goal of draining life from Earth in order to restore Cybertron, leading the film to dropping a bombshell.
Earth is Unicron.
That's right, inspired by Transformers Prime, Earth is the physical body of the Cybertronians' biggest enemy in the film universe, which I imagine confuses the shit out of anyone who's seen the recent Rise of the Beasts. But that's a story for another day, as in this movie the focus is on stopping Quintessa. And the characters involved in this quest are another low point for this movie. Cade Yeager spends the whole movie with the same annoyed tone, snapping at practically everyone in the movie except Optimus Prime and Bumblebee. He's nice to the popular characters, but rude to everyone else. That isn't suspicious at all. Mark Wahlberg's acting is weird too. He wasn't anything to write home about in the previous film, but here it seems like he's putting in a lot less effort. Also picked up by the Woodwickens is a university teacher named Vivian, a blood descendant of Merlin and the only one who can use his staff. This arguably makes her more important to the plot than Cade is, but has less screen time in the first half of the movie, and when the two meet, they are stuck with what might be the most forced romance in Transformers history. Before the two even meet, we have Cade getting a message from his daughter insisting he's a little too obsessed with helping the Autobots and needs a girlfriend, while Vivian has a similar conversation with her obnoxious family members, saying she's too focused on her career and not finding a man. It's a very cliché and eye-roll-inducing scene. Vivian's annoyed by her family, and I don't blame her. Afterwards, she and Cade spend almost all of their screen time arguing, but of course they kiss at the end of the film for no reason I can see other than the obligations of being played by the most conventionally attractive actors in a summer blockbuster. At least it's not as bad as Tessa and Shane, both of whom are absent from this movie. Tessa is away at college while Shane is hopefully in jail for having sex with a minor.
Then again, it was established a long time ago that this film takes place in the same universe as the Friday the 13th remake. Perhaps we can picture a Very different, much more appropriate fate for Shane.
In their place is a new kid character, Isabella. She's apparently been living in one of the ruined sections of Chicago since Dark of the Moon, and has a little robot buddy called Squeaks, which looks more like something you'd see in Rescue Bots or even Bots instead of the Bayformers films. He's less disturbing to look at than Wheelie, at least. I'm sure Isabella is meant to be similar to characters like Sari Sumdak or Nico Nakadai, especially seeing as she hangs out with Hound when she arrives in Cade's junkyard, who himself has quite a few of Bulkhead's traits. She's a tech-savvy girl who takes nonsense from none of the adults around her. You might remember the commercials for the film imply that she was going to have a big role with a big emphasis on girl power. But this is overblown as Isabella has a relatively minor role. I think the point was for her to help humanize Cade, but you could honestly cut her out of the movie and you'd lose nothing. Like during the final rush to reach Quintessa's base, she joins the others and Cade asks why she thought it would be a good idea for a kid to join them, and she says, "I don't know." Big franchises these days have to put up with every new entry being called woke by reactionaries for one reason or another, especially when you consider they are beating around the bush by using a buzzword instead of a more appropriate term, virtue signaling. Because that's basically what the Isabella-focused commercials were, pretending the film is more feminist than it truly is. Burton is an okay character, even if he primarily exists for exposition. I like the banter between him and Cogman, more so than the banter between Cade, Vivian, and Cogman, which is obnoxious. Also, he owns this.
That's the watch that killed Hitler. Don't screw with it.
I'd go see a movie with that title. And then there's the Autobots. And wow, did they get the short end of the stick. You got the trio introduced in Age of Extinction, who just sort of exist not doing anything. Optimus is taken out of action for most of the movie, leaving the human characters to travel around with Bumblebee. It reminds me a little too much of Revenge of the Fallen, but at least the twins are still nowhere to be found. There's a random crane Autobot who's on screen for like 20 seconds, the merchant Autobot who somehow has Starscream's head, and then there's...
Hot Rod.
At what?
Hot Rod.
At red?
Hot Rod.
Hot Rod.
Yeah. A reckless teenager put in a leadership position that allows him to mature over time wasn't good enough for the movie. Instead, Bayformers Hot Rod is a one-note character whose entire gimmick is having a French accent that even he's annoyed by. He and Bumblebee fought together in World War II, but they barely interact after the scene at Burton's mansion, with Hot Rod blending into the background like the others. Megatron is arguably the audience surrogate at this point, given he seems exhausted after everything that's happened to him. Multiple deaths and getting his role as main villain usurped by other characters repeatedly. And then there's Barricade. He was shot in the face and was last seen crawling away in Dark of the Moon. Looks like he survived as he's alive and well in The Last Night, meaning his habit of appearing in a film with his fate left ambiguous by the end continues. Because he does it again in this movie, as what exactly happened to him is unknown. The new Decepticons are either made by combining parts from earlier characters or just straight up reusing old character models. So in other words, throwaway characters. Megatron negotiates their release with Lennox, with all of these guys getting a robot only for them to be decimated in a fight with the Autobots. And it's a massive tease being a short fight. The following chase between the human characters and the TRF drones is at least 3 or 4 times as long as the battle, leaving the Decepticons with very little screen time. Except the guy with the silliest name, Nitro Zeus, who gets his head blown off by Bumblebee in the final battle, leaving Megatron right back where he started. No wonder he and Isabella have this exchange.
Go to hell!
This planet is hell.
The Guardian Knights that aided King Arthur in the past and the Autobots against Quintessa in the final battle are weird. They're a 12-member combiner team.
They're gonna build an army of combiners!
Able to turn into a big dragon thing, but their numbers remain inconsistent, as some of them die, yet can still combine no worse for wear. It's like the Constructicons from Revenge of the Fallen, except this time there's no tie-in comics to try to explain it away. Optimus Prime called the Dinobots ancient Cybertronian knights, but no connection is made between them and the Guardians. I suppose they fill the same narrative role as reinforcements from the distant past, helping the Autobots in the final battle. Quintessa's Infernocons are forgettable mooks, more so than the Decepticons. They can combine into something that looks like something out of a Doom game. Individually, though, they all look the same, and Optimus Prime has no problem taking them all out. It makes him look badass, but are you beginning to see why I call this movie a terrible toy commercial?
So the plot sucks. Characters suck. Writing sucks. The pacing sucks. The directing sucks. And the editing is horrid! Yes, I think this might be the worst Bayformers movie.
Now, for what it's worth, Michael Bay had originally intended his final Transformers film to be Dark of the Moon, and when you watch it, it seems obvious. All the important Decepticon characters die, Cybertron seemingly vanishes when the space bridge deactivates, while the Cybertronian race becomes public knowledge to humanity. Carly is Sam's love interest in the film, but it's clear the intention was for this to be the finale to his and Michaela's relationship arc. Bay had to be convinced to come back for films 4 and 5. So if it seems like he's not trying as hard, this could be why. I've already covered most of what I would classify as Bayformers goofs throughout this video, leaving me with little to talk about in the last section of this review. Except for a few minor things that couldn't naturally fit into the earlier sections, such as how the Transformers Reaction Force has drones that look like ED-209 from RoboCop, or the scene where Cade and Isabella are trying to fix Bumblebee's voice box, and the prop used to depict Bumblebee for the actors to interact with is unconvincing. In fact, a lot of the integration between the human characters and the larger Cybertronians is less convincing this time around. Or how the scenes at Stonehenge depict the location as being in a big empty field with no nearby roads or towns. Or how Barricade is played by Jess Harnell for most of the movie, but randomly has this line,
I've lived for this. I've lived to kill a planet.
where he's voiced by someone else entirely. Sounds like Frank Welker again. You can tell that isn't Megatron's line because it sounds more like Soundwave's voice, aka Dr. Claw's voice. These are all things we've seen before in the other movies, and at this point I'm tired. Audiences were too, which is why this movie is the first of the Bayformers series to underperform, making less than the 2007 original. No wonder this happened, considering this movie felt like they were taking one step forward and 2 steps back. The poor reception of this movie ended up having a big impact on Hasbro and Paramount's plans for a Bumblebee solo film. Infamously being envisioned as a prequel, however, the movie we got ended up distancing itself as much as it could from The Last Knight,
which I've decided is going to be the topic of our next video. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are as well.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
Next time on Werezilla's Retrospective.
Please. This is a mistake.
Stay cool. Hold your fire.
I don't want to hurt anyone.
Are you sure about that?